welcome to. Today we have our guest speaker, Tiffany, and we're going to just dive right in. Tiffany, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're willing to share your story today.
Thank you, Alexis. My name is Tiffany, and I'm a teacher. And I'm someone who never imagined I would one day be sharing a story about surviving, sorry, I get emotional, an abusive relationship. For many years, I believed I was in a loving marriage, but over time, I began to experience manipulation, control, and eventually a lot of physical violence. Looking back, I can see now that many of the early behaviors I thought were signs of deep love were actually warning signs that I didn't recognize. And I'm here today because I don't want other people to miss those same warning signs. And if sharing my story helps even one person recognize unhealthy patterns, trust their instincts, or realize they deserve a relationship built on respect and genuine love, then it's worth it. My faith has been a huge part of my healing, and I've learned that God's design for love is never rooted in fear, control, or confusion. It's rooted in truth, patience, kindness, and respect. And my hope is that all the listeners will leave with a better understanding of what healthy love really looks like, and that they gain the confidence to choose relationships that reflect that.
Thank you for sharing. Question one, looking back, what was the beginning of the relationship like?
Can we pause?
Yeah, you're fine. Take your time.
At the beginning of my relationship, it felt exciting, it was intense, and it was very loving. He gave me a ton of attention and made me feel chosen, special, and really secure, and even called me his soulmate. Things moved really quickly, and I believe that intensity meant that we had this really deep connection. There were a million compliments, so much affection, promises, and a strong sense that we were meant to be together. And I felt that strongly. And at that time, I didn't recognize that some of that intensity was love bombing. I saw it as passion, commitment to me, that I was his soulmate, and that we were meant to be. And I finally found the one. But looking back, I realized that relationship didn't even have enough time to develop. I was responding to how I felt, and I wasn't seeing the patterns of the control and manipulation that would appear later. And that's part of why love bombing can be so confusing. The beginning didn't feel dangerous, it felt wonderful. And I kept holding on to that version of that person. Um, Especially when the relationship began to change. I was holding on to what I saw at the beginning.
Okay, next question. Well, you kind of answered this. Do you feel like things moved very quickly in the beginning then?
It moved very quickly. We were engaged very quickly after meeting. We started out as friends, and within 4 to 5 months, we were engaged. And we were shortly married 5 months later.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. You think you're in love. I was 19. I met the guy, and then within a month we were engaged, and within a month after that we were married.
Wow.
So really fast. Yeah, really, really fast. And
Super intense.
yeah, the intense, you think it's love and oh, this is your soulmate. It means something, but it's really just them trying to reel you in.
Hmm.
What kind of things did he do to make you feel special or chosen?
In the beginning, he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. He even opened up a savings account with my name on it, and we literally had only known each other a month. He wanted to spend all of his time with me, constantly told me how beautiful I was, made me feel like I was the only woman that he wanted. He talked about our future together, made me believe we were building a life that would last forever. He made me feel safe, protected. He gave me attention after attention, and it felt like I finally found someone who truly loved me. And he would talk about our future of our marriage, how many children we were going to have, where we were going to live, vacations we were going to take. And the difficult part is that those experiences felt really real to me and he mirrored me. So if I said I like something, he liked it too. And it felt, again, very genuine. And looking back, I realized that there were moments of genuine care, but there were also patterns that became very unhealthy over time. And as the relationship progressed, the intense affection was gradually replaced by control, criticism, and manipulation. And I kept hoping the person I fell in love with at the beginning was going to come back, but the relationship became very, very different.
Okay. And at what point did things begin to change when you noticed that these were actually red flags and what he was actually doing by love bombing you?
The changes didn't happen overnight. They happened very gradually, which was really hard to recognize. And at first, little things started to make me question myself. If I disagreed with him or expressed my feelings, the conversation would somehow become about how what I had done wrong. I found myself apologizing more and trying harder to keep the peace. And then over time, I noticed that I was becoming more anxious and less like myself. I was walking on eggshells, carefully choosing my words because I didn't want to upset him. And then the relationship slowly shifted from feeling safe and loving to feeling unpredictable. And I was constantly trying to get back to the person I met in the beginning. And looking back now, those were the red flags, feeling like I couldn't be myself, feeling responsible for his reactions, questioning my own reality, and noticing that respect was being replaced by control.
I feel all of that. So,
Yeah.
um, did you notice that when he was giving you this attention and this time, that it ever became inconsistent? Like, where there were times where he would be, say, and I know I've experienced this where, like, oh, they love you and they're giving you all this attention, and then all of a sudden they get mad and they snap, and then they come back and then they apologize, and then you're like being hopeful, oh, they're just having a bad moment, it's not going to happen again, and then it progressively gets worse.
Yes. So one of the things that made it so confusing was the cycle that you're talking about. He'd be incredibly loving and attentive, and then something would happen where he'd become angry, critical, or distant, give me the silent treatment. And then after that, he would be kind again, apologize, or become affectionate. And I would think, oh, wow, he's back. This is the man I fell in love with. He would do that a lot with vacations. He would become the man that he was at the beginning during vacation. And then after the vacation, the whole cycle of love bombing and giving me the silent treatment, being mean to me, disrespecting me, being critical of me would happen all over again. And that cycle kept me hoping things are going to get better. Every time he was loving again, it made me believe that those difficult times were just temporary. And looking back, I realized I wasn't in a consistent, healthy relationship. I was caught in a pattern of highs and lows. And I now know that that can cause brain damage. And then those moments, and a trauma bond. And then
Mm-hmm.
those moments of kindness gave me hope, but they didn't erase the unhealthy behaviors that kept repeating. And then it made me second guess my reality.
I like that you brought up trauma bond actually, because people don't really know what trauma bonding is. And trauma bonding is like you think that you love them, but you're actually bonding over them because of that fight or flight mode and because they're putting you in that cycle and doing love bombing and giving you the flowers or the apologies. And then they just keep repeating that cycle. And I know in my own experience, trauma bonding wasn't just a trauma bond with the abuser. Because in my situation, there was also, and people had never thought of this before until I told them, but you're not just being trauma bonded by someone else. In my situation, there was another person that was also being abused with me. And I ended up trauma bonding with her as well. And I thought, in that moment, honestly, I thought I was like falling in love with her because I cared about her and I wanted to protect her and all of these things. And then I learned about what trauma bonding was. And I actually learned that I was trauma bonding with her. You don't just always trauma bond with the abuser. Sometimes you trauma bond if you're in a situation where you're not the only one being abused, they're abusing others in that situation.
Yes, that's true. And Um, you don't become attached because they treat you well all the time. And that's what's so confusing. It's that the relationship becomes a cycle of emotional pain followed by relief. They're relieving you of that pain. And then after the periods of criticism, anger, manipulation, or fear, those loving moments feel incredibly powerful. You're waiting for that relief. And then
Mm-hmm.
these moments create this hope that things are finally changing. You start holding on to those good times and you're minimizing the bad. Oh, they just had a bad day. Or you just excuse everything. And you're believing that if you try harder, the relationship is going to get back to the way it was in the beginning. And I kept trying. I would do more and more and more, and it was just never enough. And the bond isn't even built on feeling safe. I wasn't safe anymore. It was unpredictable. And I was constantly chasing the loving version of him that I had seen before because I knew it was in there. And that cycle made it incredibly difficult to leave. I tried to leave several times,
Mm-hmm.
even when I knew the relationship was unhealthy.
I know like seven, they've done scientifically, it takes like 7 times until a woman finally decides to leave. And when you do decide to leave, sometimes it's even more unsafe when you don't have a plan in place. And that's when they talk about like a safety plan and having a plan financially, where they don't know or don't know, like you find someone that you can trust that can help you get out. Because I've seen a lot of stories where people end up getting murdered because they're leaving and they find out that they're leaving. So, uh,
Yeah.
so this inconsistency that you went through, how did it like
Can
emotionally
I can
affect you?
I talk about a safety plan?
Absolutely. Please do.
I really want to talk about this.
Yep, absolutely.
If you do not have a safety plan, it is not safe to leave, and I cannot emphasize that enough. You never tell the person that is abusing you that you are going to leave. You create a safety plan to leave. And that was one of the reasons why I almost ended up dead, is because I told my abuser that I was leaving and that I wanted a divorce. And I was calling him out on the abuse and what he did. And I was recognizing all the patterns. And I was very vocal about it. And I almost didn't make it. And that is what's, I cannot emphasize that enough. You have to have a safety plan. You do not tell your abuser you're leaving. Um, so
Another reason why you don't tell them that you're leaving too is because then they sometimes they do the opposite and they don't try and murder you and they try and sue you back in and love bomb you again to try to convince you to stay.
yeah, so each time that I thought that I was leaving, I was love bombed or I was taken on another vacation and I was shown the good side of him again. And it gave me hope that, oh, there he is. He is still there and this is going to get better and everything's going to be okay. And no one enters a relationship expecting that they're ever going to need a safety plan. But when you begin to fear someone's reactions or your safety, it's important to take those feelings seriously and you need to reach out for help. And looking back, I wish I would have done that. And you do have to figure out your finances and you do need to have a way to escape.
Yeah, exactly. Um, okay, so you're talking about inconsistencies. You talked a little bit about how it affected you emotionally. Is there anything else that you want to share of how else it affected you before I continue to the next question?
No.
Okay. Um, so looking back now, because when you're in that current situation, it's really easy to see on the outskirts of someone else's relationship and be like, oh, look, you really need to leave them. They're doing this and that. And then you sometimes you'll have people who come to you like, oh, well, that's happening to you. And are like, oh, no, it's not. And you're blinded and you don't see it. And so my question for you is what signs did you start, like now that you're here, present, and you're safe, when you look back, are there any signs of love bombing that you noticed that you didn't notice back then?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes. So looking back, what signs do you recognize as love bombing that you didn't realize when you were in that situation?
So, looking back, I can recognize several signs that I didn't understand at the time, and it is really hard to know the signs or the patterns um, when you're in it. And that is so true. Other people were telling me to leave him, and many, many people were asking me, does he hit you? And I would lie because I did not want, sorry, I get very emotional because I did not want to ruin my family. So I was protecting him. But by protecting him, I was ruining my family by ruining myself. So the relationship moved very quickly emotionally, and he made me feel so special. I was on a pedestal. I could do no wrong. I was the prettiest girl in the room. I was the smartest. Um, I was the center of his world, and he would tell me that. And it was like there was nobody else but me. And the attention was so intense. And I confused that intensity with deep love. I thought he deeply loved me. I thought we were soulmates. And then as time went on, I noticed that the attention wasn't consistent. There would be periods where I felt deeply loved, and then followed by periods of anger, criticism, emotional distance, silent treatment, would ignore me, even in the same room. Um, and then he would become loving again. And I felt so relieved, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, things are getting better. I didn't realize I was becoming attached to a cycle. And then another sign was I slowly started to lose myself. I was now living his life not my own, his interests. Everything he liked, we did. I lost a lot of my own friends that I had before my relationship with him, and all my friends were now, my friendships were with his friends. And then I found myself changing my behavior around him to make sure that I wasn't upsetting him. I'd walk on eggshells. I would second guess myself. I would try harder and harder to make the relationship work. And nothing was enough ever. It was like filling a black hole. And then instead of feeling secure, I often felt anxious and confused. And I felt like I wasn't worthy anymore, almost like I was worthless because I went from being on a pedestal to basically being nothing to him.
What would you want listeners to know about genuine love? We talked about love bombing, but what would you want them to know about what genuine love is and what the difference is?
One of the biggest differences is that genuine love grows over time. And while love bombing can often, it tries to create instant closeness. But genuine love is patient. It gives you space to get to know each other. You get to build trust and develop a relationship naturally. Love bombing feels overwhelming. There's overwhelming amount of affection, lots of attention, promises come so quickly when you barely even know this person. And genuine love is also consistent. It doesn't disappear when there's a disagreement. Sit down, you have a conversation. It doesn't make you earn kindness or affection. Healthy love allows you to have your own opinions, maintain your friendships, and be yourself without fear. You feel respected, emotionally safe, and accepted for who you are. The love bombing, it creates emotional intensity very early. You're made to feel like you found your soulmate immediately. But if that intense affection later becomes control, manipulation, criticism, unpredictability, those are all warning signs that the relationship isn't built on a healthy relationship.
Absolutely. So you shared something, and I thought I want listeners to hear this because there are some people who it's even harder to leave an abusive relationship when children are involved. And you think you're protecting the family and you don't want to break up the family. And you mentioned something saying, but it was actually, by staying, it was actually hurting the family, breaking the family. So, what would you tell um, not just women, because men also go through abusive relationships too sometimes, and they are married and have kids and have a hard time leaving as well. But what would you tell listeners that have children involved? Um, why is actually better and healthy and okay to leave? Because especially a lot of us listeners believe in Jesus and we believe in God, and we're told you're not allowed to divorce, you have to stay married. It's in the Bible, it's in the biblical, but in the Bible it does say you can leave for abuse. Um, but more of the question would be, what would you tell listeners who are struggling to leave because children are involved when they're in an unsafe situation? Does that question make sense?
So,
Sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
that's a very, very important question. One of the hardest realizations I had was understanding that children learn about relationships by watching the adults around them. And even if they don't see your every argument, they notice the fear, they notice the tension. Gosh, this makes me emotional. Um, they see the disrespect and they see the way people treat each other. And they begin to think that that's what love looks like. So I realized that staying in a relationship where there was control, manipulation, and abuse wasn't teaching my kids about healthy love. And I wanted them to know that love should include respect, safety, kindness, and trust, not fear or walking on eggshells. So leaving wasn't about giving up on my marriage. It was about protecting myself and refusing to accept behavior that wasn't healthy. So sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is show their children that it's okay to set boundaries and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And so I hope my story encourages others to recognize the unhealthy patterns earlier and to know that asking for help or leaving an unsafe relationship is actually an act of courage, not failure.
Agreed. It also teaches the kids that whether you have a son or daughter, it's not okay to, as a man, to treat a woman that way, or as having a daughter, it's not okay for a woman to be treated that way by a man, or vice versa. And I want to clarify, guys, and mentioned this in my previous episodes, abuse is not just physical and sexual. Abuse can be mental, verbal, and emotional, being belittled, and them trying to say it's a joke. That is still abuse. And there's no comparison. Abuse is abuse, and all abuse is not okay. Um, Love bombing isn't simply someone being nice, it's often excessive attention, moving too fast, overwhelming affection, grand promises, making you feel like you found the one immediately. The problem isn't kindness, the problem is when affection becomes a tool for control and they're using it for their own benefit. I just have a few more questions. Where was God during your healing in all of this?
To be honest, for a long time, I asked that same question. God, where are you? When I was in the middle of the abuse and everything that followed, I couldn't always see him, but he was always there. Um, I wanted him to change my circumstances, but instead, God began changing me, and God met me in that brokenness, and he gave me the strength to get through one day at a time, especially when I didn't think I could, especially during that hard time. He surrounded me with people who supported me when I needed it most, and he gave me wisdom to recognize those unhealthy patterns that I couldn't see. And he reminded me that my identity wasn't defined by how someone else treated me, it was defined by him. And healing was not instant, nor will it be. And healing takes years, takes time. And there were days of grief, anger, loneliness, but through the prayer, reading scripture, counseling, taking one step at a time, I experienced God's faithfulness. And sorry, I'm trying not to cry.
You're good.
Um,
Good
he
cry.
didn't waste my pain. He actually used it to strengthen my faith, rebuild my confidence, and he gave me a heart to help other people who are walking through similar situations.
Amen.
And today, God didn't abandon me. He walked with me through the darkest valley, and he carried me when I didn't have the strength. And my story isn't just about surviving the abuse, it's about God's redemption, his healing, and his hope. And he showed me that my future is greater than my past. And he never left my side.
Amen. Praise Jesus. Um, what did God teach you about your worth?
So, one of the greatest lessons God taught me was that my worth was never determined by how someone else treated me. And for a long time, I believed that if I just loved harder, tried harder, became a better wife, things would change. But God showed me that my value doesn't come from another person's approval. It comes from being created and deeply loved by Him. And He reminded me that I deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness because that's how He sees us and He sees me. And abuse doesn't define my identity. Rejection doesn't define my identity. My past doesn't define my identity. And my identity is that I am God's daughter. I am loved, I'm chosen, and I'm valuable. And as I healed, God also taught me that healthy love never requires me to abandon who He created me to be. And real love doesn't ask me to shrink myself, live in fear, or constantly prove my worth. It allows me to be honest, respected, and emotionally safe. So today, I know my worth is not something I have to earn. It's something God gave me from the very beginning. And once I truly understood that, then I stopped chasing the acceptance from people who couldn't give me what God had already given me.
Amen. Our worth is not in another person. And how did your understanding of love change after once you brought God in the center of this? I feel like you answered some of it, but
Well, when God became the center of my healing, my understanding of love changed because I used to think love meant enduring, forgiving endlessly, trying harder, holding a family together at any cost. And I believed that if I loved someone enough, I could help change them. But God taught me that love doesn't require me to accept abuse, lose myself, or to live in fear. And so I began to understand that godly love reflects patience, kindness, truth, respect, faithfulness, and self control. And it doesn't manipulate, intimidate, humiliate, or cause you to walk on eggshells. So forgiveness does not mean removing boundaries or repeatedly placing myself in danger. With God at the center, I stopped viewing love as something I had to earn by proving my loyalty or sacrificing my well-being. I learned that I was already loved and chosen by God, and a healthy relationship should draw me closer to who God created me to be and not make me smaller, frightened, confused, or disconnected from myself. So today, I believe genuine love is not measured by intensity, promises, or temporary affection. It is revealed through consistent character, safety, honesty, respect, and actions. And then putting God at the center taught me that love should bring freedom and peace, not bondage and fear.
so someone overwhelming you with attention is not always a sign they're meant for you. Sometimes healthy love feels slower. Sometimes healthy love feels calmer. Sometimes healthy love feels less exciting at first because it's built on consistency instead of intensity. Real love grows, it does not rush. Kind of how, like, God brings peace, not chaos. If a relationship feels like it's chaotic, it's not from God. Um, I just want to say thank you, Tiffany, for coming and sharing your story and answering your questions. We're so glad to have you on this episode. And thank you, listeners, for coming. We will see you next week on episode 10. Have a great day, everyone.